great.
Welcome to the Vision with Execution show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So, Jennifer, you are the most interesting guest I have ever had just based on what I've read about you.
Love it.
And I hope that we can have a really rousing and interesting discussion as well on the podcast. Uh,
Absolutely.
I have no doubt that there's going to be some really cool, interesting things that we have a chat about. Um, I'm not sure how much you looked into me, my background, looked at any of the past shows or anything.
Just a little bit.
Okay. So I I think about the end of the world and the apocalypse probably on a daily basis, but probably for the complete opposite reason as you perhaps might, just based on what I've read about you. So my background is very conservative Christian, and so we think about what happens when we die. We think about things like the second coming of Jesus Christ, and that's often called the apocalypse, you know. So we're talking about the end of the world, and it we're coming at it from two different perspectives, and that's really why I wanted to talk with you, because in my own circle of influence, there aren't a whole lot of people that I talk to on a regular basis who think about things in a completely different way than I do. And so I always think it's valuable to talk to people who think different, talk different, act different, just have differences. And it's always funny to me that there's always a way to connect to someone no matter how different you are. So that's kind of the goal of having this chat with you. And I really want to give you a platform on my show to talk about the things that you care about and to talk about the things that you wish everybody would know. And my audience is made up mostly of conservative Christians. So let's get into it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love that you talk about like the definition of an apocalypse for you. And I think about the apocalypse all the time. And I think of an apocalypse as really a world changing event, right? And so there's a huge range of what might count as an apocalypse depending on where you are and what your life's like. I think the death of a loved one can really be an apocalypse for you because it completely changes your world. I mean, even the death of a furry best friend, really changes your whole world. Now, with Here Comes the Apocalypse and Disaster Preparedness, I'm thinking about mostly extreme weather, right? Like an extreme weather event that changes your world. And I tell the story a lot, but I have had two immediate family members lose their homes to California wildfires, two different California wildfires in the space of about 6 years. So one just woke up in the middle of the night, looked out the window, saw fire, and escaped with their pajamas and their dogs. And they were just lucky to get out of there. And that was the one that really opened my eyes to like, holy crap, things could really change, and things could change very quickly. And because they were living in an urban environment similar to where I live. And so I started looking at, oh, okay, I've got a kid now. I didn't used to have a kid before. It didn't matter as much to me what happened. Since I have this kid, I care what happens to him. I care mostly about comfort. I like comfort. I like to have good food. I like to be able to sleep in my bed. I like to get to sleep, right? And so I'm thinking about, okay, so what if we can't be at home, right? How can I be the most comfortable when I can't be at home? You think about all these people evacuating, in Oklahoma right now, there's wildfires and people are having to evacuate. And I always think about being stuck at like a high school gym and you're just there. You don't know what's happening with your home. You can't go anywhere. What's going to make your life better in that moment? And so the things that I pack in my go bag are like earplugs, face cream, soap, and then tons of stuff for my kids, right? Books, stuffed animal, activities. I mean, I need a book. I need some sort of escape because that's going to be if hopefully it never comes to pass, but if it did come to pass, I will be very happy to have those elements that I've packed.
I love that. I've and I think in a lot of the same train of thought. My 18-year-old son goes camping all the time. I am not a camper. I prefer my purple pillow and my purple mattress, my sauna when I wake up in the morning, my cold plunge,
Nice.
all of my first world problems.
Hmm.
Um, the gene for love of camping skipped me completely and hit my son with a vengeance. And he goes camping just about every chance he gets, snow or not. We live in Utah,
Wow.
so
Wow.
there's snow in the mountains right now. It was snowing on Saturday. He's on the track team, and so it was just a complete whiteout. And he was in there. He's out there throwing his disc, and everybody did terribly because you couldn't see where you were throwing. But that's what it's like in Utah. For some people, that's the apocalypse too. Just a complete
Yeah.
freeze
If it
out.
snowed like that here in the Bay Area, I'd be like, what's happening?
Yeah, and so it's so important to think about how you're actually going to live when you're in that situation, because you cannot be in fight or flight mode the whole time. You got to be prepared for the reality of living in this new situation.
Right. And I think that, people, when you think of prepping, you think of gear, right? Oh, I'm going to get an emergency radio. We've got some flashlights. We've got some emergency food, or, and people get totally crazy, right? They fill their basement with water and food and all sorts of things. And that's great. And gear is a big piece of it. But there's also planning ahead for coordination. So, like, if you are a household, like, so I'm, a family unit, right? Me, my husband, and my two kids. And I work closer to the kids, and my husband works farther away, and my husband works in different locations depending on the day. And so one of the things that we coordinated are designated meeting places. So if we can't meet at home for whatever reason, here's the first one. And then if we can't meet there, here's the second one, and then the third one, and then, the really out of town one. And also, who is your out of town contact, the person who's going to coordinate your communication, so that if the cell phone towers are super jammed and you can't reach each other, it's often easier to text out of town. And so by having an out of town contact, they'll relay the communication between you and your family, so that you can't, if you can't reach each other, you can still get status updates on where you are. And this is the level of kind of coordinated planning that I think that most people don't do, right? Even if they're preppers, they often have not thought about, okay, here are the places we spend the most time. Let's say a bridge is washed out, or the highways are super crowded. What are some alternate routes that we could take in that event? And that level of kind of thinking things ahead of time, that's what we really guide people through.
So, how did you start thinking through all these scenarios? Did you have a guide to walk you through this stuff?
I mean, I spent 3 years reading a ton of material, right? Like, I devoured the internet prepper sphere. And, so much of it is just motivated by fear, right? And I'm motivated more by community and by comfort, right? And I got this whole book on emergency communications, and I've got it behind me. That's what I was looking at. And it's like an inch long, an inch thick. And it doesn't mention anything about how to communicate with your family in the event the cell phone towers are down. It's just all about walkie-talkies and ham radios. And that's great if that's where you want to go. But I'm coming from this more as like, okay, I'm a mom. I'm tired at the end of the day, right? I don't have any more energy for these. I'm not going to go take a ham radio class. I got to go to PTA, right? So what are the reasonable steps that a modern family should take if they don't want to make prepping their entire personality? And I say to people, well, I'm not a prepper. And people say, oh, well, you're clearly a prepper, right? I mean, people think I'm crazy for doing this, and I'm like, no, I'm just really good at imagining worst case scenarios. I can do it all day long, you know? And so I think through, okay, what are the different emergency scenarios and what would we do? You know, one of the tools that we provide to in our system for disaster prep is a emergency communications flow chart. So it really says, okay, if you can do this, do this. If you can't do that, do this, do this, you know, and we had to invent that completely, you know, with common sense and a ton of research. And so we're giving people this structure that then they just plug and play, right? So that you don't have to spend 3 years devouring all the literature, because I tell you, it was boring. It was so boring. And most of the resources out there are, I found, extremely boring. And I'm somebody who needs punchy graphics and, like, you know, fun in order to make something digestible and something that I'm willing to spend my time on.
One of the things I really focused in on from what you just said was you're really good at imagining the worst case scenarios. And my brain is really good at doing that too. I call that anxiety.
Uh-huh.
And my daughter is an expert at imagining the worst possible scenario that would happen to her and her friends, or if she didn't have any friends. It's like, for her, it's friends and all the worst things that could happen. That's her world. So I think all of us have this ability to imagine the worst case scenario within certain spheres that we're fairly expert in. So we feel like, oh yeah, I know that the worst is going to possibly happen. My brain tells me all the time the worst things are going to happen in my business, and it never ends up happening that way, thank goodness. But uh, the reason I bring that up is because when I've talked to other people who come on my show and we talk about creating a vision, that's always couched in positive terms. Whenever anybody is like, yeah, I want to create a vision for X, Y, and Z, it almost always is followed by this really positive outcome scenario. But that's a hard thing to do. It's hard to create a vision that's always this positive outcome, because our brains are actually wired to do the complete opposite, to protect ourselves, right? Would you agree with this so
Yeah,
far?
absolutely.
Okay. So creating a vision of what to do in the worst case scenario, we're we all are pretty dang good at doing that already. And you've taken it to the next step, which is, well, what if that does happen? What are we going to do about it? How are we going to execute that potentially terrible vision into a reality that we could actually live with? So that's why I thought you would be a really cool person to have on my show, because typically we're talking about like creating businesses or doing like extraordinary things with the cool things we can imagine, but you're like, hey, the reality is I I can imagine the worst case possible, and I can imagine a way to work through it intelligently. So I would love to hear, maybe if you want to go deeper into how you created some of your vision for the worst case, and then how how you wanted to execute that into a livable, comfortable reality.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, so when I thought of this project, the first thing I saw was the art that I have on the disaster playbook that says, you know, not you, you got this, right? So these people are freaking out, and then this person is chill, right? And that's you. You were chill because you have planned ahead. And when I approached my friend who did the art on there about being my artist, I said, "Oh, I'm doing this project, you know, will you do the art?" And she said, "Well, the apocalypse, I just assumed I'd be dead." And I'm like, "You should be so lucky, okay? Because that, in my mind, is the best case scenario. A swift death, you're done. All right, apocalypse, complete, right?
Right.
And like my life is also complete. And then you're not around to clean up the wreckage or to deal with a terrible scenario. I think that, excuse me, the worst case scenario is you're hurt, right? Or your kids are hurt, or you can't reach each other, right? Those are much worse scenarios. And those are, in all likelihood, way more likely than just being knocked out or killed or, getting to get out that easily. So that was really where I'm coming from, right? Is like, okay, so, and also having had so many people in my lives now lose their homes and lose literally everything, like my mother-in-law, they lost their home in 2021 and they first evacuated from the fire and they brought all their stuff. And then they were told, oh, it's safe, you can go home. So they went home. And then they said, oh, no, you need to evacuate again. Okay. So they didn't bring everything they brought the first time. And that was when their house burned down. And so they lost, photo albums and stuff because they were like, oh, well, we already got all this stuff. And then, we had to put it back. And now we're doing it again. Why bother? But they actually lost everything.
Man.
Yeah. And they lost their their whole town burned down, right? So their local doctor burned down, and so I was with her and I was listening to her on the phone with the pharmacy because she needed her meds, right? And she's trying to tell them that she needs a refill of the prescription, and they're like, "Oh, well, just call your doctor." And she's like, "I can't call my doctor. They burned down." Like, and they're like, "Oh, but you just need to call your doctor." And she's like, "I can't call my doctor. It burned down." And this went on for like an hour and a half. And I'm sitting there getting madder and madder and madder and madder. Right? And she's just calmly handling it. And that is not how I would handle. Like, I think of that as bureaucratic hell, right? That's like, all these phone calls to like get something straightened out. And that's one of the steps that we have people do is photocopy and create hard copies of insurance policies, passports, ID, your will, your car title, all of that, and prescriptions so that you've got it. Because if she had had a physical copy of the prescription, she could have gone to a pharmacy and explained, oh, well, the doctor can't reach the doctor. It burned down. Here's my prescription. Or she could have found a doctor. She would have shown them the prescription. It would have been a lot easier for her to get her meds refilled. And, after you lose something like that, or you're dealing with a severe emergency, a tragedy, you lost your home, you could have lost your pets, you could have lost a family member, and then to have to fight with the bureaucratic powers that be about your ID or your insurance or any of that, that's a nightmare. I wouldn't even wish on my worst enemy.
Yeah, yeah. And that totally reminds me of the scene in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I don't know if you've seen that, but and it's based on a book, so you could read the book too.
Yeah.
I think that's required reading for anybody who likes sci-fi and comedy. The scene I'm thinking of though in the movie where they're just in the alien world all where everything is a bureaucratic nightmare. And you have to get a form stamped to be able to go submit the form to somebody else who can't stamp it until you've gone and gotten it stamped by the first person, and then you have to have a different form to get it stamped the second time, which you can't get until you've talked to the second person and gotten them to stamp it. And in reality, that's just slightly worse than the actual reality.
Yeah.
I've
Yeah.
I've talked to people, just for example, if you want to go move to Sweden, specifically, I've looked into moving to Sweden of all places. I don't know. My son wanted to move there when he was 12 for some reason.
Cool.
So we're like, okay, let's figure it out. Let's see what it takes to move to Sweden. And you had to have somebody who lived there sponsor you to move there, for one thing. So you can't just move there without knowing anyone. You have to know somebody who lives there. Number two, you have to have a bank account in the country of Sweden. Now, you can't get a bank account unless you have a permanent mailing address in the country of Sweden.
Oh no.
But you cannot get a permanent mailing address unless you buy a place for cash or you are renting a place that you can call a permanent address. But guess how you rent a place in the country of Sweden?
A bank account?
You have to have a bank account.
Yeah.
Yes. It's this circular loop of conflicting logical, illogical regulations and bureaucratic nightmare that is in real life the process. And that's probably just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the nonsense in all levels of the world we live in. So that's
Which
I
came first, the chicken or the egg or the the bank account or the permanent address, right? You
right.
know?
And not to bag on Sweden, they have a lot of awesome things there if you can actually figure out how to move there. We talked to a family who had gone through the process of figuring out how to move there. And so they walked us through all that. And in the end, it was worth it for sure. Sweden has a lot of amazing healthcare laws and cool things about their uh, government system and very clean, friendly, well organized place. But you got to be a genius to figure out the bureaucracy. So the end result of that rant by me is the level to which we have to go to just figure out one simple thing like medications. It gets destroyed very quickly if you're not prepared. But if you're prepared, it's like manna from heaven.
I mean, I think it still could be pretty awful, but you know, at least you're better situated for a positive result, you know? And I do think that, you know, you mentioned like you don't want to have to be figuring all this stuff out when you're freaked out. And I do think that it's very hard to make decisions when you're triggered. And that's another reason why, like, you know, let's say something happens and then you're texting your partner to be like, where should we meet? Where should we meet? Right? Like, what if you can't reach them, you know? And then you're just guessing and you're just going to some place where you think they'll think of too as the place where you should meet. I mean, I just sleep better at night, going back to that anxiety piece, right? Like, um, there's a quote that action is an antidote to fear, right? And anxiety is really like our brains being like, oh, there's something we could be afraid of, and there's something we could be afraid of, and, you know, listing out all the things we could be afraid of. And so, you know, that's why I think I created the disaster playbook, which gives you just discrete steps to check off, like, okay, I did that, I did that, I did that. And then, you know, when you have those anxious thoughts, you're like, well, I did what I could, you know? And then you can kind of hopefully chill out and enjoy your life. And hopefully you never need any of it, right? That's the goal, is to never need any of it. But if you did, and then, you know, along the way, when you have those anxious thoughts, you can say, well, I did what I could.
Yeah, I like that. And I coming at it from a Christian perspective, I would add in the fact that I do believe that there's a higher power navigating and helping us navigate and working these things out for our best good. I really do believe that whether you call it the universe or God or Buddha or a higher power, there's an outside power that's operating for our good, even if it doesn't look like things are going good in the moment. That's one of the things that helps me really work through my anxiety is just to go back to that belief that I've had since I was a kid to know that someone's got my back and they really do want what's best for me. They love me. That my God loves me, and I believe that 100%. I believe God loves everybody, in fact. So maybe in the tragedies that people are experiencing in the world right now, it's potentially an opportunity for them to experience maybe coming closer to their beliefs, whether no matter what that is. And I really don't care. I'm no judge of anyone. I'm a recovering addict. So I'm I'm always hoping that everybody is able to come closer to finding peace and happiness in their current situation without having to go through extreme difficulties, whether that's weather conditions or beating an addiction or working through a divorce. Like all these life-changing things, those could be our apocalypse. That, like you said.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. That's a lovely thought.
Thank you. Well, I do believe it is my calling in life to talk about God and Jesus Christ wherever I can. And I appreciate you being respectful of my uh, constant, I guess, desire to do that. And
Hmm.
I really respect people who are just open to good, respectful dialogue, no matter where they're coming from. And I hope that people feel comfortable enough doing that with me. I talk to people on the plane all the time. Anybody I'm sitting next to, we're going to get to know each other.
I'm the same way. I
So
love talking to strangers.
I do too. And my kids hate it when we're on a plane.
Yeah.
Like they're like, Dad's going to sit and talk to that person again. Just watch. And I do. Can't help myself. One of the reasons why I started this podcast. I just like talking to interesting people. So, Jennifer, before we wrap up, by the way, I like to keep my episodes to about 30 minutes or so.
Sure.
Um, what's the call to action that you'd like to put out there for anybody listening to this?
So please go to herecomesapocalypse.com to learn how to prepare your family. We have a whole organizational system for disaster preparedness called the Disaster Bundle. The backbone of it is the Disaster Playbook, which guides you step by step through all of the pieces. You know, we talk about gear, but it's mostly about coordinating action and getting your family completely on the same page and your communication plan created so that you've got this clarity, and so you can kind of put that little anxious uh, part of you to bed with a kiss, you know, because that anxious part of you is really just trying to protect you. And I think that doing this work to prepare your family and to create a really robust emergency plan is in service to protecting you and protecting your household and ensuring comfort if times get really challenging.
I agree. I think it's well worth it. So the website was herecomesapocalypse.com.
Yes,
Spell
it's a
that
mouthful.
correctly on the first try, and I'll give you $5.
We also have hcta.xyz, if that's easier, you know.
Wow. Well,
Yeah,
I'll put both links in the show notes so people can
thank
just
you.
click on them. How about that?
That sounds good. When my aunt was trying to go to the website, we were together and she kept typing it in on her phone and she's like, I just can't spell apocalypse. I'm like, well, I should have known better than to name it that, but I really thought it was funny. Here comes apocalypse. Here comes whether or not you want it to or not.
I'm trying to actually spell it in my head right now, and I do not feel confident I could spell it correctly on air, but I'm going to try. I can't see it. I haven't looked anywhere to cheat. So here we go. Apocalypse. Did I get it
Nice.
right?
Yes, way to go. Yeah.
You're like the expert in spelling apocalypse now.
I spell it wrong sometimes, you know, especially typing. I type really fast, and my email, jen@herecomesapocalypse.com, is very long. It's a lot of letters to type. And so I will sometimes type it wrong, and hopefully I haven't done it anywhere where it really mattered.
Well, Jen, super happy we got a chance to chat for a little bit. Thank you so much for your insights, and I learned a little bit, and I do feel better that there's this book out there for being ready for the apocalypse, whether it's the Jesus Christ coming kind or weather related or what have you. It's always good to have this available. So thank you
Yes,
so
thank you
much.
for having me.